Jessa Granger slammed the door of her old beat-up Honda Civic only to hear the unmistakable click of the lock, and then her heart sank. No. No, 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 she muttered, tugging at the handle. Her eyes widened in horror as she peered through the window and saw her keys sitting on the front seat, taunting her from behind the glass. The afternoon sun was blazing down on the Whole Foods parking lot, and sweat prickled along her neck. She had just finished a long shift waitressing at a brunch spot downtown and had stopped to grab groceries with the last bit of her paycheck. Now her phone, purse, and dignity were all locked inside the car. Jessa looked around, her ponytail sticking to her neck, as she tried to will anyone to help her. A sleek black Aston Martin pulled into the spot beside her, its engine humming like it belonged in a movie. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a crisp white shirt, dark jeans that probably cost more than her rent, and sunglasses that screamed money. She turned away, embarrassed. The last thing she needed was some rich guy judging her for her junk car and her poor life choices. But he noticed. "You okay?" His voice was deep and calm with a curious warmth. She glanced over and gave a tight smile. "Locked my keys in the car. My phone's in there too. So, basically, I'm an idiot." He chuckled, pulling off his sunglasses. "That makes two of us. I've done that more times than I care to admit." She blinked. He had light brown hair that curled slightly at the edges and sharp hazel eyes. His jawline looked like it had been carved by someone with talent. He looked like he could walk into any boardroom or Calvin Klein ad and own the place. "I'm Liam," he said, extending a hand. "Jessa," she replied, shaking it with her slightly sweaty palm. "Thanks for not laughing at me. I would've, but I figured you might cry." He teased gently, pulling his phone out of his pocket. "I'll call a locksmith for you." Her eyes widened. "Oh no, you don't have to. I want to." He was already dialing. "Just let me do it." 15 minutes later, a locksmith van pulled up. Jessa stood beside Liam, arms crossed, still stunned that a stranger, especially one this intimidatingly put together, had gone out of his way for her. The locksmith got to work, and Liam leaned against his car, glancing at her. "So, what were you rushing to get into your car for?" She laughed. "Groceries. I've got a $5 frozen pizza melting in there. High-class dining. I like it." He smiled. "What do you do?" "I work at Rosie's Diner. Waitress life. It's fine. Pays the bills. Mostly." He nodded, watching her. "And dreams? You got any big ones?" She hesitated, surprised by the question. "Yeah. I want to run my own bakery someday. But that's more of a maybe when I'm 60 and win the lottery kind of thing." "You don't need a lottery ticket. You just need a plan." She raised a brow. "You sound like you run motivational seminars." He laughed. "No, just a guy who believes in going after what you want." Within minutes, the locksmith popped the door open. Jessa let out a breath of relief and thanked the man profusely, only to have Liam swipe his card and pay before she could offer. Her jaw dropped. "Wait, I can pay you back. Don't worry about it," Liam said, stepping back. "You've had a long day." "Consider it my good deed." She stared at him, suspicious. "Do you go around rescuing helpless women in grocery store parking lots often?" "Only the ones with frozen pizza and big bakery dreams." She laughed again, shaking her head. "You're ridiculous." He looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You're interesting." She shifted her weight. "Well, thanks again. Seriously, I owe you one." He paused, then casually said, "How about dinner?" She blinked. "What? Dinner? With me?" He looked at her like he already knew she'd say no. "Unless you're against eating with strangers who call locksmiths." She hesitated, every instinct screaming that this was crazy. But also, she kind of wanted to. "Fine," she said. "But only if you promise not to show up in that car again. It makes my Civic feel insecure." He laughed, and it was low and easy. "Deal." Jessa drove away with her heart still racing, wondering what the hell had just happened. Liam watched her car pull out of the lot, then tapped his phone. "Jack," he said to his assistant on the other end. Reschedule tomorrow night's dinner with the investors. I've got plans. He smiled to himself. He had no idea what it was exactly, but something about Jessa Granger had just flipped his entire world upside down. Jessa stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror the next evening, brushing mascara onto her lashes with the shaky precision of someone who hadn't gone on a real date in over a year. Her studio apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle she'd lit in an attempt to mask the scent of fried onions drifting in from the neighbor's kitchen. She glanced at the clock. 6:45. He'd said 7. She still didn't know where he was taking her. All he'd said was, dress like you want to be remembered. That was a dangerous thing to say to a woman with exactly one decent pair of heels and a thrifted navy wrap dress she'd been saving for a job interview that never came. A knock echoed from the hallway. She opened the door to find Liam not in another tailored outfit but in a charcoal button-down with the sleeves casually rolled and dark slacks that didn't try too hard. His hair was slightly tousled like he'd run his fingers through it right before knocking, and he held a small bouquet of tulips, not roses, not lilies, but tulips. You clean up nice, he said, handing her the flowers like it was the most natural thing in the world. She took them, caught off guard. I didn't have time to buy you flowers, so I guess we're not even anymore. Then I'll keep doing things until we are. He didn't lean in or make a move. He just waited while she grabbed her keys and purse, letting her lock the door without hovering. Downstairs, she expected him to lead her toward the curb, but instead he guided her toward the alley behind the building. Are you taking me to a second location where I get murdered? She asked flatly. He laughed under his breath. Not quite. They stepped into the back lot, where a classic black motorcycle sat gleaming under the overhead light. It wasn't flashy, it was elegant, vintage, and clearly cared for. You ride? He asked. She eyed it warily. Only if you promise not to take turns like you're in a Bond movie. I'll go easy on you. He handed her a helmet and helped her secure it, his fingers briefly brushing her jaw. It was the kind of small, unintentional touch that left her pulse out of sync. The ride wasn't terrifying. It was exhilarating. The city blurred around them, the wind wrapping around her like a secret. She clung to him because she had to, but the warmth of his back beneath her palms felt more grounding than any seatbelt. When they finally pulled up to a quiet side street, she saw a low-lit restaurant tucked between two ivy-covered buildings. The sign above the door read, Noir. The hostess greeted Liam by name and guided them past the main dining area to a small table near a fireplace, away from the noise. Do you bring all your Locksmith girls here? She asked, settling into the velvet chair. He tilted his head. Only the ones who make me laugh before I've even ordered a drink. A waiter appeared with a bottle of wine already uncorked. Liam didn't even glance at the menu. Jessa raised an eyebrow. You come here often? I invested in it last year, he said casually. Best risotto in the city. She set down her water glass. So you're one of those people who just owns restaurants? Sometimes, he replied. Only if I believe in them. And what exactly do you do when you're not rescuing women or launching eateries? His expression shifted. Not guarded, just unreadable. I run a company that builds luxury eco-resorts, he said after a pause. Mostly abroad. I'm here trying to open one in the Catskills. She blinked. That's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Hedge fund. Crypto. Something with spreadsheets and zero personality. He laughed. It was quiet but real. I got bored of making money just to make it, he said. Now I try to build things that matter. The waiter returned with 2 plates of something that looked too beautiful to eat. Jessa hesitated before picking up her fork. This is a lot, she said. I mean, this isn't usually my world. He leaned forward. But you're not intimidated. She met his eyes. Should I be? No, his voice dropped slightly. I like that you're not. They ate. The conversation shifted books, travel, music. She told him about her favorite childhood memory, baking with her grandmother, how the smell of nutmeg always made her feel like she was 10 again. He told her about a summer in Italy when he almost bought a vineyard on impulse. They didn't talk about money, or what came next, or what this was. After the plates were cleared, he asked if she wanted to walk. They stepped outside into the cool night air, the city quieter now. You ever think about leaving New York? He asked. All the time, she replied. But I never do. I think I'm afraid the chaos is the only thing keeping me moving. He looked at her for a long moment. You don't strike me as someone who needs chaos, he said. They walked in silence for a while, steps in sync without trying. When they reached her building again, she found herself reluctant to go upstairs. Liam glanced up at the window above. Can I see you again? She nodded slowly. Yeah, you can. I'll call you, he said. She smiled. You don't have my number. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded square of paper. I figured you might give it to the locksmith, he said. She stared at him. You really don't miss anything, do you? Only when I want to. He handed her the helmet she'd forgotten she was still holding, then left with a nod. Jessa climbed the stairs with tulips in one hand, heart beating out of rhythm in her chest. Something was happening. Something that didn't feel like it belonged in her world. And yet it already had her in its grip. Jessa didn't hear from Liam for 3 days. Not that she was counting. Not that she checked her phone more than usual or paused every time she heard footsteps outside her apartment door. She wasn't that girl. She had bills, shifts, and a fridge that needed restocking. She had real things to worry about. Still, when her phone finally rang late Thursday afternoon as she was folding aprons in the back room at Rosie's, she didn't even look at the screen before answering. Hey, I hope you're not allergic to horses, Liam said. Because you're meeting one. She blinked. I'm sorry, what? Saturday. I'll pick you up at noon. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty. And bring sneakers. I work Saturdays. Not this one. I already spoke to Rosie. She says you're overdue for a day off. You spoke to how do you even know Rosie? I came by this morning. Had the pancakes. They were aggressively average, but the company was great. Jessa stared at the wall, her brain struggling to catch up. You just showed up at my job? I wanted to see where you spend your days. And I wanted to make sure you'd say yes to this. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide the grin that was forming. You're impossible. Maybe. But I'm persistent. On Saturday, he pulled up not on the motorcycle, but in a Navy Land Rover with enough dirt on the tires to prove it had earned its keep. He wore a faded t-shirt, jeans, and sunglasses she hadn't seen before. The quiet, kind of expensive. They drove upstate, leaving the city behind until the skyline was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. Trees lined the roads and the air got clearer. Jessa rolled the window down, letting the wind tangle her hair. I didn't know you were into horses, she said as they pulled onto a gravel driveway that curved through a private gate. I'm not, he said, cutting the engine. But I figure if I'm going to build in the Catskills, I should understand what people love about it. This place is run by a friend of mine. She rescues retired racehorses. The property unfolded in quiet elegance, wide pastures, a red barn, and a stable that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. A woman in her 50s waved from the fence and Liam introduced her as Harper. She's the real deal, he said. Used to train Olympic teams before she decided animals were better company than people. Harper handed Jessa a brush and pointed her toward a chestnut mare named Willa. She likes you already, she said, watching Willa nuzzle Jessa's arm. I'm not sure what I'm doing, Jessa said, laughing as she awkwardly ran the brush along the horse's side. You're doing fine, Liam said, stepping up beside her. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. She glanced at him. That sounds like something from a yoga retreat. Fine. I'll admit I read it on a plaque in a spa lobby. They spent the next hour tending to the horses, walking the grounds, and talking about everything they hadn't touched yet. She told him about her high school baking competition where she placed second only because her oven short-circuited mid-cake. He told her about the year he lived in Morocco trying to build a solar-powered resort that never got past the permits. So you fail sometimes, she said, brushing hay off her jeans. Often, he said, but I don't really see it that way. If it taught me something, it was worth it. She studied him, hands in her jacket pockets. You talk like someone who's already figured out what matters. I haven't, he said, but I'm trying to. That's why I'm here? She raised a brow. Here's in the Catskills, or here with me? He looked at her, long and steady. Both. Later, they sat on the tailgate of the Land Rover, sipping cider Harper had brought out from the farmhouse. The sky was streaked with lavender and gold, the kind of sunset that made the whole world pause. I used to think guys like you were only good for breaking hearts, Jessa said quietly. And now, I don't know yet. He turned to face her fully. I don't want to be someone you guess about. She hesitated. Then tell me why you really came to Rosie's. You could have just called. He didn't look away. Because I needed to know if what I felt that night was real. And it was. Even more than I expected. I've been around a lot of people, Jessa. I've dated women who looked perfect on paper. But none of them made me want to rearrange my entire schedule to watch them wipe down a counter and roll their eyes at me. She shook her head, lips parted in disbelief. You don't even know me. I know enough to want to. His voice lowered. And I want you to know me too. Not the version people see in headlines or pitch decks. Me. Her heart pounded, but she nodded slowly. Okay. He leaned in, not pressing, not assuming, just close enough to let her decide. When she met him halfway, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was slow, warm, and certain. Afterward, she pulled back just enough to look at him. What happens when this stops being fun? Then we talk about it. And if it gets hard, we work through it. She eyed him. You sound very confident in your conflict resolution skills. I've had practice. And if I don't want to be a project? You're not, he said. You're a person. I want to know the messy parts, not fix them. She looked away toward the trees stirring in the dusk wind. I haven't had a lot of people in my life who wanted that. That's going to change. They didn't rush to leave. They watched the stars come out one by one without speaking. When he finally drove her home, he didn't try to come up. He walked her to the door, kissed her forehead, and left her with a look that said, I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in a long time, Jessa believed it. Jessa stepped into the converted loft space with a cautious kind of awe, her boots echoing against the polished concrete floors. Wide glass windows stretched from the floor to the ceiling, revealing a skyline bathed in amber light. The space was open, industrial, and lined with exposed brick, but softened with hanging Edison bulbs and dark wood accents. It was the kind of space someone either inherited from an eccentric architect uncle or bought with a wire transfer that cleared in minutes. Liam stood at the far end, sleeves rolled as he arranged something on a long counter. When he looked up and saw her, his face lit, not performative, not polished, just real. You're early. Couldn't stay home, she said, shrugging off her coat. The suspense was killing me. He walked over and took her coat, hanging it on one of the wall hooks shaped like horse heads. I thought tonight should be different, he said. So I hope you're not allergic to surprises. She narrowed her eyes. Is this going to involve another animal? No, he said, leading her toward the kitchen area. But it does involve flour. She stopped short. You're not serious. I am. I figured if I wanted to understand your world, I should at least try to bake something that doesn't end in smoke. On the counter were 2 aprons, one navy, one striped, and a spread of ingredients that looked impressively organized. Liam, she said slowly, are you trying to bake with me? Not trying, he said, tying on his apron. Committing. She watched him fumble with the knot behind his back and finally stepped forward to help. This is either going to be very sweet, she murmured, or a disaster. Possibly both, he admitted. Over the next hour, she guided him through the steps of making cinnamon rolls from scratch, a recipe she'd memorized years ago but hadn't made in forever. His attempts to knead the dough were enthusiastic but clumsy, and he got flour on his jaw without realizing it. She didn't tell him. She just watched the way he laughed at himself, the way he listened when she corrected his measurements, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room that mattered. Why this? She asked as they waited for the dough to rise. Why me? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. Because when I met you, everything else stopped. Deadlines, meetings, the next pitch deck, it all just muted. And I realized I didn't want to go back to that version of my life. You barely knew me. I knew enough to know I wasn't faking it when I offered to call the locksmith. That wasn't calculated. That was instinct. She hesitated. And what about now? What's instinct telling you? He stepped closer. That I want this to be real. Not just a few perfect days. Not just good timing. I want the chaotic parts too. The stress, the mess, the mornings when nothing goes right. I want the days when we don't understand each other and still choose to try anyway. Her throat tightened, but she held his gaze. You say that now, but you live in a world that's built on convenience. On yes men and perfect optics. I'm not polished. I don't belong at investor dinners. I don't need you to be polished, he said, voice quiet. I need you to be honest and brave and exactly who you are. She grabbed a towel and wiped the flour from his jaw. You're going to regret saying that when I burn the caramel on your birthday cake. I'll eat it anyway. The timer dinged. She turned away to pull the dough from the bowl and he helped her roll it out, spread the filling, and slice the rolls. By the time they slid the tray into the oven, she felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not doubt. Something steadier. Once the rolls were baking, they moved to the oversized leather couch facing the windows. He poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle she hadn't noticed before, something rich and dark, with a cork that popped like it meant business. So, she said, curling her legs under her, what happens now? You tell me, he said. I've made my decision. She sipped the wine, watching the city beyond the glass. This isn't what I expected. Any of it. Neither did I. But I've learned to trust the unexpected. She turned to him. I'm scared. I'd be more worried if you weren't. She exhaled. Okay. Let's do this. The oven chimed again and he followed her back to the kitchen. They pulled out the tray, both leaning in as the scent filled the space. She drizzled the icing across the rolls and handed him one, still warm. He took a bite, winced slightly, then smiled. Burned the roof of my mouth. Worth it. She laughed, and it wasn't nervous or polite, it was full. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Before I forget. She opened it and stared. It was a certificate of incorporation for Jessa's Hearth. A bakery. Her name. Real. Her hands trembled. What is this? A beginning, he said. The space is already leased. Equipment's being delivered next week. You'll have total creative control. No strings. Unless you want me in the picture. She stared at him, breath caught. Why would you do this? Because when someone makes you feel more alive than anything else ever has, you don't let them go. You build with them. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't hide them. I don't need you to fix my life. I'm not. I'm offering to walk beside you while you build the one you've always wanted. She set the paper down and stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. Then yes. To all of it. He kissed the top of her head, holding her like he never planned to let go. Outside, the city glowed. Inside, everything was beginning. And for Jessa Granger, it had all started with a locked car door and a man who called a locksmith. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted out into the street as customers filed through the wide glass doors of Jessa's Hearth. The bakery's soft gray and honeywood interior buzzed with quiet warmth, not just from the ovens, but from the hum of something alive. People laughed, chatted, sipped coffee, and lingered near the pastry case like they couldn't decide which piece of heaven to try first. Jessa stood behind the counter, hair pinned back with a gold clip, apron dusted in flour, cheeks flushed from the early morning rush. She handed a warm almond croissant to a woman in a cable-knit sweater and nodded to the next person in line, moving with practiced grace. Your sourdough is getting a reputation, said a voice behind her. She turned, brushing her hands on a towel. Liam leaned against the doorway leading to the back kitchen, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, watching her. He looked like he hadn't slept much, not from stress, but from helping her prep before dawn. He'd been there every morning for the past 2 weeks, learning which trays needed rotating when and how to fold parchment to line a tart pan. It's the starter, she said, grabbing a wooden board. Has a bit of attitude. Like someone I know. Are you talking about me or the yeast? She gave him a look. You'd know if I were talking about you. A customer interrupted with a question about the flourless chocolate cake. Jessa stepped forward, explaining the ingredients with a glow in her voice that hadn't been there before. Liam waited, not needing to fill the silence. He just watched her, the way she moved, the way she connected. There was no spotlight here, but somehow she illuminated the entire room. When the last customer left, Jessa locked the door and flipped the sign. Her shoulders dropped an inch. "Full house again," she said. "We might actually break even this month." He walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You've already broken expectations." She leaned into him, letting the quiet settle. "Brielle called from the Catskills property," he said after a moment. "She wants you to design the dessert menu for the opening weekend." Jessa turned in his arms. "Me? You?" She said she wants something that makes people feel like they're home. A slow smile spread across her lips. "We'll need cinnamon. Lots of it." Liam brushed a strand of flour-dusted hair from her cheek. "Whatever you need, you've got." She searched his eyes. "You really mean that, don't you? You don't scare me, Jessa. Not your ambition. Not your fire. I'm in this, all of it. The 5 a.m. alarms, the flour in the laundry, the late nights fixing the oven door. I'm not going anywhere." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I love you." His expression shifted, not surprised, but deeply moved, like something inside him finally landed. "I love you too," he said. "I think I did the second you told me you had a $5 pizza melting in your car." She laughed, pressing her forehead against his. "You're ridiculous." "Completely. But you're ridiculous." He kissed her then, slow and certain, right there in the middle of the bakery, surrounded by the scent of vanilla and sugar and everything sweet. Later that evening, the bakery was quiet. The chairs were flipped on tables. The lights dimmed except for the string of bulbs hanging in the front window. Jessa stood barefoot, sipping tea while Liam swept up crumbs near the register. "There's something I've been meaning to show you," he said, setting the broom aside. "You're not going to pull another real estate contract out of your coat, are you?" "No," he said, reaching into his back pocket. "Something better." He handed her a small, linen-bound notebook. On the cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "The Hearth Cookbook Volume 1. She opened it, flipping through page after page of hand-written recipes. But they weren't hers. They were his interpretations, notes from watching her bake, sketches of pastries he'd described tasting, even a few small drawings of the bakery layout. "You made all this? I figured it was time I started learning the language you speak so fluently." She traced her fingers over the pages. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" "Not unless you tell me to." She closed the book, set it on the counter, and pulled him in by the collar. "Good. Because I don't want to do any of this without you." That night, they didn't talk about the future in abstract. They made plans. Real ones. A second location, maybe. A weekend trip to Paris in the spring. A dog. Eventually Liam insisted on a golden retriever. Jessa wanted something scrappy and weird. They moved into a loft above the bakery by the end of the month. The space was small but light-filled, with a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and a balcony that overlooked the street where they first met. Mornings began with coffee and silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Evenings ended with soft jazz, shared meals, and the occasional burnt crust that they both agreed to lie about to guests. They didn't chase perfection. They chased each other into laughter, into arguments, into forgiveness, into something lasting. And on a rainy Wednesday in April, with just a few close friends and a bouquet of wild tulips, they said their vows in the courtyard behind the bakery. It wasn't grand. It wasn't extravagant. But it was exactly them. Jessa wore a knee-length dress she'd sewn herself from old linen. Liam wore his sleeves rolled up and flower on his cuff. Rosie cried during the ceremony, Harper sent a bottle of cider from upstate, and someone brought a lemon cake that collapsed slightly in the middle. They danced under fairy lights, barefoot, soaked from the rain, laughing like they had the rest of their lives to figure out the rest. And they did. Together. Always.